Good evening, everyone. I feel like a hush fell over the crowd, and now it's my turn. So welcome to the Library of Congress. My name is Elizabeth Schreiber-Byers, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's Live at the Library program, Small Clothes, Big Stories, Fashion Dolls, and the American Story. I hope you all had a chance to look at the display of collections related to doll fashion in the Woodall Pavilion. Our library staff have been very excited for tonight's event and pulled together some very special items, including dolls from their personal collections. This event is part of Fashion at the Library of Congress, the threads that connect us, the library's 2026 America 250 Fashion Initiative, exploring how style tells the American story through creativity, culture, identity, and design. And this special initiative is made possible through support from the Ford Foundation. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Friends of the Library of Congress, or FLOC. You can support programs like this by visiting loc.gov/give to donate and become a member. From paper dolls to American Girl, fashion dolls have long held a unique place in American culture. They are toys, storytellers, miniature fashion archives, and reflections of the times in which they were created. For many people, dolls and their clothing offered an early introduction to history, creativity, self-expression, and imagination. Through style, design, and dress, these objects have helped generations of Americans understand both themselves and the world around them. Tonight, we will explore the cultural impact of fashion dolls, the role clothing plays in storytelling and historical interpretation, and why these objects continue to resonate so deeply across generations. We are thrilled to welcome an outstanding panel of guests this evening, and I shall begin to introduce them. Valerie Tripp is the author of American Girl books, plays, short stories about Felicity, Josefina, Samantha, Kit, Molly, and Mary Ellen, as well as the Best Friend books and the Welly Wisher and the Hopscotch Hill School series. Tripp has written a STEM series for National Geographic Kids and adapted classics for Sterling Publishers. She has written numerous leveled readers, songs, stories, nonfiction essays, skills book pages, poems, and plays for educational publishers, especially for the Super Kids. She has spoken at countless schools and top cultural institutions, including the Library of Congress. Dr. Emilie Zaslow is professor and chair of the Communications and Media Studies Department at Pace University. Her research explores the intersection of girlhood, race, popular culture, capitalism, and identity. She is the author of Playing with America's Doll, a cultural analysis of the American Girl collection, the only book-length study of the American Girl collection, offering insight into some of the nation's most beloved dolls. She also wrote Feminism, Inc., Coming of Age in Girl Power Media Culture, an influential study of girl power, consumer culture, and media. Dr. Kat Cartwright is the senior historical researcher at American Girl, where she leads research for character development and brand history storytelling. In her time at American Girl, she has developed several characters, including the 1990s historical twins Isabel and Nikki. I watched some of their videos today. And Girls of the Year, Covey, Leela, Summer, Raquel, and Daisy. She also led research for the brand's 40th anniversary book, The Making of American Girl, and its first adult novel, Samantha, The Next Chapter, which comes out this fall. Finally, Mara Wilson, known for her childhood roles in Mrs. Doubtfire and Matilda, is a writer, actor, and award-winning narrator living in Los Angeles. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Vanity Fair, Elle, McSweeney's, Reductress, and many other outlets. Her most recent book, Good Girls Don't, is a coming-of-age memoir and follows on from her first book, Where Am I Now? True Stories of Girlhood and Accidental Fame, available from Penguin Random House. More recently, you can find Mara narrating a wide range of audiobooks across genres. She was recently honored with an Earphones Award from AudioFile for her narration of Scorched Grace by Margot Duehi. In addition to her creative work, Mara is a fierce advocate for mental health and chronic illness awareness, with a focus on dysautonomia and endometriosis. She currently serves as an ambassador for the Los Angeles Dysautonomia Network and an endo-educator for the Endometriosis Foundation of America. Thank you all for being here to talk. Thank you all for being here to listen. And let's talk about fashion, dolls, and everything in between.
Thank you all so much for being here. I've got to tell you, I came all the way from Los Angeles this very day for this. Had a bit of an odyssey getting here, but I am so happy to get here and to be here with this wonderful group and everybody that I have told about this event. Everybody, all of my friends and family who said, "Oh, what are you going to DC for?" When I told them, their jaws dropped, and you could just see them flashing back to, playing with Josefina and playing with Addie and playing with Molly, and you could tell exactly what fashion dolls meant to them. And so actually, that is a first question, and we want to talk a little bit about your own personal connections to dolls. And I've got to say, this one here holds a very special place in my heart. When I was filming the movie Matilda, I had perhaps my best birthday ever. I turned 8 years old, and Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman gave me the whole set of Molly. Yeah, and her books and everything. And I think I was a little disappointed at first because I wanted Samantha. But as soon as I read Molly's books, I knew that Molly was me and I was Molly. I was like, oh, she's a prankster. She pulls pranks on her older brothers. That's me, baby. So let's think about everybody's first personal connections to dolls. Do you remember the first doll or doll outfit that really stayed with you? Do you want to start? Valerie, can we start with you?
I'm one of 5 children. I have 2 older
Me too.
sisters, a younger sister and a younger brother. Yes, so I inherited a Betsy McCall doll. My older sisters each had a Betsy McCall doll, and my sister Rosie got mad at my sister Kathy and cut off her Betsy McCall doll's hair. I loved it. I loved that act. It was so extreme. And so then I was given that Betsy McCall doll, and I liked it. I thought she looked very cute, actually, in a pixie cut. And I liked it that she'd, been through a hard time. And if you've read any book that I've ever read about the American girls, you know that that's what I like to do. In fact, one time my daughter said to me, "Mom, do you even like these girls? Because all you do is give them problems." So my Betsy McCall was very dear to me, and sometimes I was Betsy McCall, and she spoke for me. Sometimes Betsy McCall was my partner in an adventure, and sometimes I was Betsy McCall's mother. And I think the fluidity with which girls float from one relationship very easily, from one relationship to another with their doll, teaches them empathy. You're stepping into someone else's life, and you're learning what it feels like to be a different person, and I can't think of anything more important, so I'm eternally grateful to my poor, shorn Betsy McCall.
She's a survivor. She's a survivor.
Well, although I study dolls, I hate to say that I did not have a beloved doll, and maybe that gave me the distance to be able to study them. My sister and I coveted Barbie, but I grew up with parents who did not really want us to have that normative beauty idol sitting in our toy shelf, so we walked and drooled through the toy aisles and looked at the pink boxes, but we were geared or guided toward the Legos and the Play-Doh boxes, and I spent a lot of time imagining things rather than acting them out with dolls. And I think what actually drew me to American Girl is the narratives, and I do have some beloved narrative characters that I hold dearly, like Anne of Green Gables, Laura Ingalls Wilder, all of the Judy Blume characters. So I was more of a reader than a doll player.
Did you ever read Betsy Tacy?
Did not.
You did not?
No.
Okay, that is Betsy
okay,
Tacy is
right.
that is you can still read them as an adult, and they
Okay.
they don't always hold up, but they mostly hold up. And
Okay.
yes, and any other Betsy Tacy fans? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they're wonderful books.
I'm gonna remember.
So for me, it was The American Girls. And actually, I had Felicity, which is unsurprising given my hair color. And that blue gown that Felicity's wearing over there is actually my childhood gown that I had for my doll. But I'll say with The American Girls, it's what I really remember and what resonates with me most today is a specific memory I have of playing when I was 7 or 8. And I had just read Josefina's series, and I had taken the couch cushions off of my couch, and I had set them up like a little fence. And then I took the blanket on the back of the couch, which was red like Josefina's skirt, and I wrapped it around my waist, and I picked up my little brother, who was 3 or 4, and I told him, "You're Sombrita." And that's Josefina's little goat. And I remember picking him up and putting him in the pen that I had made with the couch cushions. And I don't remember what happens after that. He probably started crying, or the couch cushions probably fell over, because that was a big thing in childhood. But I think that really speaks to the kind of resonance of American Girl and why we all still love these characters, and they really encourage imaginative play and kind of those relationship moments and bringing the stories to life. And so for me, it was much more than just a doll ever. They're really characters and have these whole worlds that we bring to life.
So this is a very interesting question. It says dolls can tell us a lot about what a culture values. And for me, I think about how there's the story, and perhaps apocryphal, but this is what I've heard, that Barbies were designed because people noticed, a woman noticed that her daughter was pretending that her dolls were adults instead of just playing with baby dolls. She liked the baby dolls too, but she wanted to pretend to be an adult and do the things that adults did. So Barbies were designed as an adult woman for them to play with. And I think about that, and I also think about the fact that American Girl dolls were roughly the same age as roughly the same age as I was when I was playing with these, or perhaps a few years older. And then you got to play with them in a way that was like you were playing with, an older sister and her friends if they were a little bit older than you. But I think that definitely shows a change in the culture, because it shows, yes, maybe some girls want to pretend to be a mom, but also some girls want to pretend to be adult women who have their own lives. Or maybe they want to pretend to be, their age, but having fun and having adventures. So what do fashion dolls reveal about changing ideas of girlhood in America at particular times?
Well, I think specifically the American Girl collection was created to say to girls, take yourself seriously, we take you seriously. This was the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s. And we're Pleasant Rowland, who created First Pleasant Company, which turned into American Girl, wanted to create something of lasting value. She wanted these not to be throwaway dolls. So she was literally and figuratively investing in herself and her creativity in the people she was creating these for. She was creating a universe that said to girls, you deserve high quality, you deserve something that's going to last forever, you deserve books that take you seriously and present you with serious problems, and you deserve something very beautiful to play with that is the same age that you are. You're not only, going to turn into, we're not saying you have to rush into being Barbie. We're saying you're important right now. Celebrate who you are right now. And no one had done that before. So I think whether Pleasant was picking up on a cultural change or creating a cultural phenomenon, that was different. No one had done that for girls before.
It's true, and just thinking about that gives me chills. I mean, I think that's why I always loved, Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary, because they were writers who took children seriously, who wrote books that said, you are fully formed people, and the things that you worry about are, really serious, and maybe you are experiencing things that you don't quite understand. So I love that she took them seriously, and she told, little girls and really little kids, you are to be taken seriously.
I always say when I speak to classes, you're actually more important than these characters because they're fictional. You are a pleasant one to show. You're part of a continuum, women helping women inventing things, women being creative, and you're part of that continuum, and you're going to make a contribution to that continuum. You already are making a contribution by who you are, and you are, I want to nourish you with these wonderful things to play with, and I want to nourish your imagination.
And I think an important piece of it, too, is that Pleasant didn't just take girls today seriously. She took girls' experience in the past seriously. And that was really revolutionary in the 80s when she was coming out with these books, and these really, really well-researched books and products. Is she was looking at the historical record and seeing an opportunity that not even academics had really recognized yet. And she was like, we need to figure out how to get at girls' experience, what their feelings were in the past, what their everyday lives were like. And I think that's another really important part of her vision of taking girls seriously. It's that not just the girls today, also the girls in the past, so that all girls can see themselves as part of this bigger community.
I'd like to add just a little bit of a different perspective as well, or an additional perspective, right? If we think of dolls as tools of socialization, in every time period, dolls have been instruments through which mothers mostly teach their girls values and what's important to them and what ideologies they should embody. And, although Pleasant and Valerie did something very different in terms of narrative and even the body of the doll, there are some lessons. I think it's equally instructive to look at the lessons that have been consistent over time, right? So I think there are 4 lessons that come through in every time period. One is, little girls are taught to be consumers. Fashion dolls teach us to collect, to consume, to buy, because of course we're not just buying the doll, we then are buying maybe her friend and definitely her clothing, and so we're encouraged to consume, right, and to see ourselves in that role. In addition, we're encouraged to see ourselves as sartorial actors, right, people who embody an identity through our clothing, right? We put on an identity, and we get a chance to play with that through our dolls. Also, we're part of a beauty culture, and we learn that all dolls have hair. Almost all fashion dolls have hair that's brushable and braidable, and we're taught that, we're not just sort of ourselves, we are also ourselves for others, and that we are in a culture of presentation. And lastly, narration, right? We learn that we are narrators of our own stories in every time period. It gives us an opportunity to play with that style, with the hair, with the clothing, and to play out these identities. And we learn, who we are, and that we actually are agents and have control over how other people see us. So I think those are consistent across, every era of fashion dolls.
I also say, too, I think it's important to think about how girls have created their own dolls throughout history. So all of the American girls, like the original American Girl characters, they all come with their own product dolls, right? Even back to Kaya, who's created her own doll. Or there's a scene in Kirsten Learns a Lesson where she creates a doll to give to Singing Bird when she befriends her, a Dakota girl. And I think there's something really special in that moment where it can tell us about the cultural value that girls place on dolls as these spaces of creativity, and how what we're all talking about, our relationship with the dolls, is that there's kind of this age grade play that adults kind of present girls with, but there's also the value that the girls put in the dolls.
I mean, I know that I really loved all of the dolls, the clothing that was made, professionally for them. I loved going to the store and buying a new outfit for my Barbie or my American Girl doll, but I did also very much appreciate the dress that my grandmother made, and the little coat that my mom knitted for my Barbies. And I thought that was sort of a nice mix, because it was a nice creation that somebody in my family had clearly put a lot into and really loved, and I loved that I could do that and sort of pair it with an accessory or something from here too. I do think that was something that was really cool, and I think that the way you can see also the way that children play with their toys as they get older, they can get more and more creative with them, and that I think is a really fascinating thing. Representation has become a much bigger conversation over time. I do remember being very happy when I found out, even though I was way too old to. I think I was probably either in high school or college, and I thought, oh, it's way too old. I'm way too old to buy an American Girl doll, right? Although I probably still could. I was so excited when I found out that there was a Jewish American Girl doll coming out. Yeah, I was very happy about that. But how do dolls, and especially doll fashion, shape conversations around identity, race, and belonging? And that is a big topic.
Yeah. I can start if you want. I mean, I think there's sort of three questions we ask when we think about representation and dolls, and those are who's telling the story, right? What story is being told, and how is it being told? So who's telling the story? Whose voices are in the room? Which advisory boards are put together to create that story? And then thinking about how is the story told? So if we think about moving away from American Girl just a tiniest bit, thinking about the ways in which race is encoded onto the body of the doll has been a really interesting study. So Anne Ducille wrote about the first Black Barbie, who was called Colored Francie, in 1967, and that doll is she says, a dye-dipped doll, right? So there's nothing about that doll that makes her a black doll, except for she's a Barbie with brown plastic, right? And so this question of not essentializing race and also not erasing race, right? And finding that place between erasure and essentialism, and not having a caricature of race, is another question that doll makers and doll companies have tried to figure out and balance. Well, I'll pass it to you guys, but I think, there's these questions again about, how do we do this? And of course, I don't have to do it. They have to do it. I just have to study it, which is the best.
Yeah, so I'll speak to that. So I think representation is obviously an ongoing process, and I think the evolution of the American Girl line kind of speaks to changing discourses in public history and toy making and children's literature about how to do representation responsibly. And so I actually brought I wish I could make it bigger, but this is a character timeline of all the characters that American Girl has created in the last 40 years, and it includes the historical characters and the contemporary characters. And so today, the timeline includes Kaya from 1764, all the way to Raquel in 2026, who's right here with me. And Raquel is Samantha's great-great-granddaughter, and she's also Mexican-American. And to develop Raquel and kind of all of the American Girls, we've worked really closely with experts, and especially in the communities that we're trying to represent. And I think that kind of expertise in our collaboration is really important to the representation. And I think also when you think specifically about the fashion that a doll wears, I think that American Girl's ability to tell stories around the fashions really give the representation so much more meaning. So for example, I think about Addie's pink dress here, right? Extremely iconic. Everyone knows this dress. But if you haven't read the stories in a while, let me remind you how Addie gets the dress. In Meet Addie, this dress is the first dress she wears in Freedom. And that's because the advisory board that we worked with, who were all experts in the Black experience in children's literature, they really felt that that was extremely important, that girls meet their doll in the first dress she wears in Freedom. So in Meet Addie, this dress is a gift from Miss Caroline, and Miss Caroline is the woman who helps Addie and her mother escape to freedom in Philadelphia. And then in Addie Learns a Lesson, in the first couple pages, you see this beautiful illustration of Addie and her mom arriving in Philadelphia on the docks in this dress. And so I think that American Girl, because of the storytelling, has a really unique opportunity in terms of kind of bringing representation to life that has really, really meaningful and intention behind it. And so the dress becomes something so much more than just like fabric on the doll body. Now it's very symbolic of Addie's freedom. And I think that's very unique to the American Girl brand.
I think another wonderful thing about representation is that I'm always impressed, and just my heart just is full of happiness with when I talk to people who have read the books and they have identified so strongly with someone who doesn't look like them at all. A lot of times the mothers assume a child's going to want the doll who looks like her, but no, that's not the doll they want, because they know the story, and there's something about that character's story that really resonates with the child. And so I love the idea that we're not all only looking for stories about ourselves. We're always being lifted above that, actually. And again, that word empathy comes to mind. Representation helps us read about someone who's lived long ago, far away. In the case of Josefina, speaks a different language, but there's something about her story that resonates with us. Josefina's mother has died, and her aunt has come to live with the family. I did that in the book because I received so many letters from girls saying, my parents are divorced, my father's married again. Is it okay for me to like my stepmother? Doesn't matter. The cultural difference didn't matter. The language didn't matter. None of it mattered. The heart of the story was what the reader was identifying with. And I think that that's a wonderful thing that representation does, is to show us that we actually have a lot in common.
Can I add one more thing? The third thing I just want to bring up is this question that American Girl has dealt with over time, and this question of, what role does trauma and oppression and the experience of racism play in the character's life, versus potentially on the other side having dolls, or stories, characters whose culture is celebrated, right? But like, for example, we've had these conversations. I'm not telling Valerie anything that she doesn't know. Josefina doesn't experience, because of the time period that she's living in, right before, in 1824, just at the precipice of the Santa Fe Trail opening, she doesn't really experience racism in her life. We don't get to see that in her life, right? But with Addie, with Melody, with Claudie, we do. And so there's a little bit of inconsistency maybe in the way that the brand has dealt with it, but I think I'm not here to criticize the brand, because I also love American Girl, like many of you. But I think it's important to think about, what role does racism play in the lives of these characters, and how much does a brand think about, how they want to represent this experience?
No, it's true. When I thought about when my niece was the right age to get an American Girl doll, I asked my brother, so would she want one that, would she perhaps want the Jewish American Girl doll? I believe her name's Rebecca. Would she want Rebecca? And my brother said, she actually likes learning about people who are different than her. She finds that really fascinating. So maybe you should get her Josefina, or you should get her Addie, or you should get her Kaya. Maybe you should get her one of those. And I did, because she wanted to learn about people different than her. And she was at an age where she was able to handle difficult stories and hear about things like racism and and cultural differences and things like that. And she loved it. I mean, she was very happy with that. And I think that it's also amazing how often you can see representation now. I know like disability representation is something you can see in fashion dolls these days. And, you know, perhaps in the past 10 years or so, you can see that. I feel like I didn't see that as much as a child, but that is something that I would have loved to see as a kid.
And I think that's why it's such an ongoing process. So I look at this timeline, right? And I'm like, wow, like 40 years over, I think 50 characters. That's a lot. But there's so much more work to be done because girlhood, there's so many experiences of girlhood and we'll never represent them all, but we can keep trying and we can keep adding to it. And everyone keeps kind of talking around this idea at American Girl that we think about, and that's the characters as windows and mirrors. And I don't know if this is a pleasant quote or not, but we think about the characters and the entire timeline of the characters as mirrors that girls can look at and see themselves reflected, but also windows through which they can learn about other cultures, about other perspectives, about empathy. And so I think that's kind of one of those tenets that we think about at American Girl is this windows and mirrors concept.
So probably, actually, let's see a show of hands. Who here remembers either saving up for fashion doll clothing or maybe circling all the things in the catalog that you wished you could get but knew you never were going to get? Because I did that. I remember adding it up once and was like, oh, where am I going to get $800? So why do you think collecting doll clothes feels so personal and emotional? And also, why is fashion such a powerful part of why we connect to these characters?
I think, of course, with all of the American Girl characters, it begins with the history. It begins with the time. And so the time dictates the fashion. And the time then usually leads to the geography. And now I'm going to tell you the whole secret of writing an American Girl book so you can go home and do it yourself. Once I know what time the character lives in, I research and try to find out what was the major cultural, political, economic problem of that period. When I was writing about the character in the 50s, Mary Ellen, it seemed to me that the major issue was conformity versus diversity. We all have TV sets in our living rooms, but we know our mother doesn't look like Mrs. Cleaver. You know, so we're trying to define who we are in as an individual and who we are in the face of pressure to conform. When I know that major issue, that is my character's personality. That's her personality. Kit has to be optimistic because she lives during the Depression. Felicity wants more independence than a girl of her socioeconomic level would have been allowed when she was growing up. So when I know the time and I know the geography, then I know the character's personality, and then we know what the clothing would have looked like. We know the aesthetic. In the case of Josefina, the landscape itself taught me a lot about her personality and what her clothes would look like and what her house would look like. The palette even is very much shaped and inspired by the time period and the history. So the fashion is a tangible, in many cases, visual reminder of the time period that the character lives in. I brought with me the infamous sweater. Kirsten, I originally wrote 3 story outlines for a character named Rebecca, and Rebecca was from Norway. And then the telephone rang and it was Pleasant, and she said, Valerie, I found the most adorable sweater, but it's from Sweden. So we're going to have to say goodbye to Rebecca from Norway and say hello to Kirsten from Sweden. In those days, nobody was paying any attention to what we did, and we had plenty of time we could make a change like that easily. But I think that actually, it sounds like a funny, frivolous story, but it actually shows you that from the very beginning, Pleasant wasn't going to compromise. She wasn't going to pretend that this Swedish pattern was from Norway. It was always going to be about authenticity. The clothes are another reminder to whoever is interacting with them, a child or a grown-up. This was carefully thought out. This was carefully researched. This was created with tremendous respect and attention. And this sweater, to which Kirsten should be very grateful, was an inspiration, and because it was so authentic and so beautiful. And in some cases, the clothes came from the period, and in some cases, there was a lot of back and forth. Sometimes I would tell the product and dress developers what I wanted the outfit to look like, and sometimes they would come to me with something. One of the products that, when I was writing about Kit, I knew she wanted to be a reporter, so I said to the product development people, I want her to have a typewriter, and they're like, what? You want a typewriter that's in perfect proportion for an 18-inch doll? Even the people who made the boxes said we're going to have to make a whole new box to shape that typewriter, but they made a typewriter, and it was a dandy. Pleasant always said of all the products, that was her favorite one. When the Kit dress, same story about Kit, the Christmas story, came, the dress designer had given Kit a wide white collar, so wide it was bland. So on it they put a little Scotty dog pin. From that pin, I created Uncle Hendrik's rather unpleasant dog, Inky. So you can see sometimes it went one way and sometimes it went another. Sometimes I would request a specific outfit. Kit's coat that's made from her father's coat turned inside out and sewn and made for her out of a conspiracy of kindness as a surprise. I wanted a specific item of clothing, and then sometimes the dress designers would come to me with something that would inspire an aspect of the story. There was a lot of back and forth.
I think there's a lot of reasons why people collect, right? There's like the joy of the hunt, and there's the joy of having a complete collection. But I mean, I think, you know, the quality, first of all, the clothing is adorable, right? I mean, it's just so cute, but also it brings the stories to life. And I think, you know, Kit's coat that Valerie was just talking about is one of those pieces that brings the story to life. Yes, it's pieced together, right, with her father's old coat, right? And then she sees children who are hungry and unhoused during the Great Depression, and she gives her old coat to one of them, but then she realizes that that's not enough, right? And that she then writes the letter to the editor, and she, you know, encourages policy change and a cultural perception change where people can recognize that these are children who are in need and should be cared for, and thinking about policy decisions is sort of like a whole blueprint for me in that one coat. So I think the integration in American Girl, but with the stories and the, you know, accessories and clothing and the whole narrative structure of it is really what brings that clothing to life and why people collect it so much.
And I often put it this way. It's when I say Samantha Parkington, you all picture this doll, right? But what you're feeling and what you're really remembering is her entire character world. So you were remembering her personality, which is generous, kind, compassionate. You're remembering her friends and family, like hunky Uncle Guard and Aunt Cornelia and Grand Mary. And then you're remembering her material world, which is the house in Mount Bedford, the Piney Point, the New York City streets. And so you might first picture a doll in her clothing, but what you're actually experiencing is her whole character world. And I think that's the magic of American Girl.
It makes me think a little bit of Nora Ephron's Love, Loss, and What I Wore, and how we can have articles of clothing that are actually very symbolic of big moments in our lives. And I mean, there's a reason that I still have my show choir dress from when I was 15, you know, which, and if you've read my book, you'll know why. It's a lot of unpleasant, but also happy memories at the same time. But yes, I think about that, and I think about the details, really, like, you know, I loved Molly's cake. Molly had this chocolate cake, and then I read the book and I realized how much they had to save up rations to even make that cake. And I remember desperately wanting Addie's lunch that had the little love cookies in them. I thought that was the cutest thing ever, and that was all that I wanted. And even things like, I think I learned that you could make paste from flour and water, from Samantha's stories, or maybe it was even in American Girl magazine. They talked about that as like a bit of trivia. And my parents were not very happy about that because it created a big mess. but just the details of these things, I think back to these things and I think of the clothes and I think of the accessories and I think of just the memories that they inspire in me. So
originally, too, or maybe not from the very beginning, but very soon, there were girl-size clothes that were the same as your doll's clothes. And when I speak at school, still, I'll bring Molly's raincoat. That's heavy. You would hate to wear it on a humid Washington rainy night. It's heavy. And I say, yeah, because synthetics weren't invented yet. So the clothes can tell you something about the period as well. Even non-verbally, you can learn, girls love to put on Felicity's red cardinal cape and twirl around. And there's a romance about that cape. And it tells you something about, when we were talking about cultural values, or it tells you something about the period that the character lived in, what materials were being used, and that too is part of there's always two parts to American Girl. There's the education and the entertainment. And when you put a coat on, that might be entertainment, but it's also education.
Yes, I think that it's interesting how often clothing is a connection to the past, and it really tells you a lot about the periods that you grow up in, and also clothing can tell you so much about who people are. I remember we had to make, in a design class that I took in college, we had to make, because the teacher was a costume designer, we made a board that had what we would wear if we were designing a character, but the character had to be ourselves. And then there was another one that said, what would you wear if you were a character, but you lived in this time? So I think mine was the late 30s. And what I ended up finding is I found a bunch of things from girls who were at women's colleges. And in those days, still to this day, I was not very fashion literate. And it was a lot of, kind of frumpy. And also it was the 2000s, not a great fashion time for anybody. But I remember finding pictures of girls and just what their clothes were made of in magazines, or just the way that they rolled up their sleeves. And I thought, that girl is me. Or I saw a picture that Ouija took of some girls of some teenagers in a theater, and one of them had kicked off her shoes and was sitting on a chair to kiss her boyfriend. And I remember thinking, okay, that's me when I'm feeling a little bit freer. And so I put that alongside the girl who had rolled up her shirt sleeves and was hunched over, kind of slouched like this. I thought, those are both me. What do we think it is about clothes and fashion that really is a good way to connect people to history?
Well, clothes are metaphors. Whenever I speak to a group, I have them start by standing up and pretending that their two hands are stays. And I say, just the way Felicity's body is, I say, take a deep breath. I hope you didn't have a big lunch, because you're going to squish your rib cage in, squish, squish, and you have to stand up very, very straight. No cooked spaghetti noodles. I always say you're standing up very, very straight. And just the way Felicity's body is constrained by these stays, by this vest, so too her life was constrained by the rules that she was expected to follow. And then I always say, let go, and everybody goes, they're like, aren't you glad you live in 2026 and we don't have to wear stays? So that too is a metaphor. Our clothes are looser, more comfortable in 2026. That tells you something about the agency that we have in our lives that Felicity wouldn't have had. Clothes had to be preserved. Clothes had to be treated very carefully. You wouldn't have had 5 white shirts. You would have had 1. If you got a spot on it, that spot was going to stay for a while, even up to Molly's time. So the care of clothing and the shape of clothing and the weight of clothing and the weight of clothing on your body tells a lot of, it's not even metaphorical. It tells you what your life might have felt like if you lived during one of the periods that these characters lived in.
And I think it's just such an everyday experience. And so it's a really good entry point for young people into history, because it's something they do every day, is wear clothing. And so it really gives them a tactile experience of kind of what it was like in the past. And I think just that everydayness, and that goes back to Pleasant's vision of the American Girls collection, bringing that everyday experience of girls to life.
I think also, what's encoded in a doll, what the doll company or the author intends for the doll is not always what's decoded, right, and how we play with it. So if we think about in our regular lives, we're very constrained in the way that we can present, maybe in our school or in our work, in our community, and being able to play with clothing on the doll body is something we maybe can't play with in our own lives always. And so there's a freeness there and an ability to explore identity. With Barbie, we can, because fashion dolls in general, with Barbie, we can see, like, I can try on, I can be both a veterinarian and an astronaut in 30 minutes. When I'm playing with American Girl, I can time travel, right? I can go from Colonial Williamsburg to, the Harlem Renaissance in 30 minutes. So I think that's another reason why the clothing can be really fun to play with, and people collect it and holds a lot of meaning.
So, Emilie, your work looks at the cultural impact of American Girl. I know that we talked a little bit backstage about how I personally follow social media accounts that will sometimes do memes and even announce the news with American Girl dolls. Every now and then some huge social, political news event will happen, and all the comments will say, "This is how I found out." I found out because Molly told me. I found out because, Kit told me. Why do you think these dolls continue to resonate so strongly with millennials and Gen Z today?
Pleasant and Valerie and all the women that were working at American Girl did something very different, right? So they took girls seriously. And when you have a company that's called American Girl, you have to investigate, what does it mean? What is the brand saying about what it means to be American and what it means to be girl? And one of the things that they communicated to girl was to be an American girl meant to be an active member of society. They were too young to vote, but they were not too young to make speeches in front of their classmates, to write letters to the editor, to as Rebecca does, end up on a soapbox and deliver a speech in front of a rally. They were all active. They were all using their voices and their time and their energy and sometimes their money to make change in their communities. And this was not change that was just selfish or for their own empowerment, but for an equitable society. And I think that still matters to millennials today, and remembering those lessons that they learned. And it was also really different from what was going on in sort of the greater part. Pleasant was on the forefront of this in '86, but by the mid-'90s, we have this kind of big girl power media culture. And, the Powerpuff Girls are superheroes. They're not real girls. And we're getting a lot of messaging about being empowered through sexuality, which is not what young girls are, looking for in power, or should not be looking for in power, right? And, or T-shirts emblazoned with, like, "You can be it," or like, empowerment. But that's not what American Girl was doing. They were really showing girls, like, almost like a roadmap of how to be active citizens. And I think that it's still exciting for millennials today. And so they, use that in their memes and in many other ways.
Yeah, you'll see Samantha Parkington talk about labor laws, and you'll think, well, that does kind of track. You'll see a meme where she's saying, make sure that you have, make sure that you can take a bathroom break at your company. And I'll think, yeah, Samantha probably would be advocating for that.
One of my favorite moments is in Rebecca's story. So if you remember Rebecca's story, she is told not to go down to this rally, and the rally is for labor, better labor conditions for people working in factories in New York in the 1900s, and she is told not to go there, so she decides to write a letter to the editor. She puts it in her pocket, and she does end up going against her parents' wishes to the rally, and she encounters police officers hitting and beating up the union leaders, and she's caught in a kerfuffle and ends up on a soapbox, and she doesn't know what to do because she's standing there and she's supposed to be the speaker, and she pulls the letter to the editor out of her pocket and reads it to everyone. And this is just like such an empowering moment. Everyone's afraid of public speaking. Little girls are really afraid sometimes of speaking publicly. And this is an example of how girls can really participate, and even if they haven't necessarily planned, they can face these problems, they can encounter these challenges, and then step up and make a difference.
I think that it's not only the specific events that happen in the story that show girls being their agents of change, and girls being the people who cause the trouble, make the mischief, and come up with the solutions. I think the reason why millennials, and I'm so proud, I think of them as my alums, the people who have maintained an affection for American Girl. First of all, I think it is partly to be reminded of how you felt when you first read the stories, or you first played with the doll. There's a delight in revisiting that, and there's a tactile delight, certainly, in playing with it, or feeling the doll, holding the doll again. That doll was your friend. That doll had adventures with you. That doll knows stuff about you. That doll knows secrets. That doll's important to you. So there's a lot of pleasure in that, and a lot of power in that, and a lot of beauty in that. And I think in addition to the specific ways and different ways that American Girl characters assert themselves and make change, I think young adults read the stories and the feeling of, yes, you can. Yes, you can. When you were 10, you read this book that told you, yes, you can. Molly did, and you can too. We all need that so much right now. I think we're being given lots of messages that we don't have power, and that we can't make change, and that things are happening on the right and left that we don't, it all happens so chaotically and quickly. And I think to go back to that quiet, firm, reassuring message, it's not saying it's going to be easy, but it is saying if you stick to it, yes, you will be able to decide who you are and what contribution you can make and what contribution you want to make. So again, not so much even the specificity, but the overall feeling that you had about American Girl, and when you were playing with American Girl and when you revisit American Girl, is a very positive, nourishing feeling. And I think you should be proud of going back to it.
I also think it comes down to American Girl told us, and I'm speaking as a 90s girl, American Girl told us to be creative, right? It wasn't just the dolls and the stories. We were acting them out, like I was referring to earlier, but we also had the paper dolls. We also had the cookbooks and the craft books. We also had American Girl magazine, which literally invited us to write to the editors of the magazine and send in short stories and send in drawings. And in the American Girl archive, my favorite thing to look through is the girls' letters to the brand, because they are so creative. And I think we see that creativity all over social media today and what millennials are doing, and it's beautiful. It's just like a blossoming of creativity that American Girl taught us.
I love those, because this is exactly what we said. Stand up, speak out, use your creativity, use your voice, whether it's funny, whether it's outlandish, go ahead and make some noise.
I just remember that one of our assignments was to present something and to demonstrate something. I think that probably a lot of people have that assignment in school. Maybe in 4th or 5th grade, you have to give a speech where you talk about a recipe or you show how to do something. And I actually think I used a magic trick that I learned in an American Girl doll magazine. So, yeah, and I got a good grade on that. So... we've also talked, I know we've talked about how, I mentioned backstage, my friend Laura growing up, who was, the biggest American Girl doll fan there was. She and I would play American Girl dolls, or we would play Barbies, and they went to some dark places. She really liked the dark stories, but they were incredible. Her stories were brilliant. And now I found out a couple years ago, I looked her up, and she's now a science fiction and horror writer. And I thought, yeah, that fits, because we had, our dolls were going through apocalyptic scenarios, left and right, and she thought of every detail. And I was just thinking, yeah, that has inspired so much creativity, and I think it still inspires creativity today. I also think, I wanted to ask you, do you think that the love of American Girl has influenced, pop culture or fashion to this day still, even though... even like the millennial love of it, the Gen Z love of it, does it still continue?
Absolutely. I think American Girl speaking personally and speaking from the letters that I've read in the archives and the people that I speak to at events like this, American Girl inspired a lot of our careers. So I'm a historian in part because of American Girl. I see clapping, yay. Teachers, librarians. I shared backstage, actually in the American Girl, the Making of American Girl, the coffee table book this year. We've featured numerous people who have become women because they were inspired by American Girl. So we have a photographer, Sydney. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her beautiful work. We have Kim, who's a book illustrator, and I found her because I found her letter in the archive, and it said, one day I'm going to be a book illustrator, and she is a children's book illustrator today, and so she's in the book. There's also a historian in Colonial Williamsburg. There's Britt Bennett, the author of the Claudie series. Her first kind of entry point into writing was the Addie stories. And so then she got to speak with Connie Porter when American Girl approached her about becoming an author for the Addie series. And so I think absolutely, it's not just fashions, because we see the fashions all over social media, right? There was the one really recent trend where I don't know who it was, but she made beautiful outfits of the historical characters reimagined for her bachelorette, I think it was. And she made them either by thrifting or she actually sewed them. And so I think, yeah, so it's in the everyday culture, but then you also think about shows like, what was it? Nobody Wants This, and there's the reference to Felicity having her hair cut, and I'm just that is an iconic reference, and it's in a huge pop culture show. There's the SNL skits. I mean, I think American Girl's having a little bit of a moment right now, and so go girls, they're doing great, and I think it's because of the lasting impact that the message that American Girl gave us as girls.
So, Kat, how does the team approach designing historical outfits? Where does it start and which details are most important to getting the look and the feeling right?
Yeah, so Valerie kind of spoke to this a little bit before, but it really starts with the research. I think both Valerie and I are often asked, what comes first? Is it the product or is it the book? And the answer is the research. It's neither of those things. It's really the research and the conversation with advisory boards. And that's where it really starts. And so we really look to amass as many visual and textual descriptions that we can that can give us a window into what a girl might have worn. So we catalogs, magazines, photographs, paintings, diary entries, shop records, things like that. But as we amass these visuals, we're also thinking about historical context. So we want to know, would our specific girl in her time and place wear this outfit? And so to get at an answer like that, we'll look at kind of the prices in the catalog. So we don't just look at the whole page of beautiful visuals, we pay attention to the context in which something was worn. And so that's really where the research starts. And then we start to have this really collaborative process between the art directors, the product designers, the editors, the historians, the author. And in that collaborative process, we really give meaning to the outfit like we've been talking about. And so we make sure that the outfits have specific story ties every single time. And yeah, it's extremely collaborative, and it all begins with the research. Neither the book nor the product come first. It's really the research.
Perhaps this says a little bit about me. I could admit to being a bit of a nerd here. I actually always enjoyed the parts at the end of the book where they would show real things, where they would show, what the posters looked like in World War II and what outfits people would wear there and what, I'm thinking of Molly's books in particular, just because those were the first ones I read, and, what the ration cards looked like. And I loved that. I loved all of the detail about that. And it really does show you that the research is treated with the utmost care.
And it really is. And that's when I think about yes, I'm always asked, well, the dolls are so expensive. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not just buying a doll. You're buying an entire research process, a whole storytelling world. The value that's in this doll and these dolls is so much more than the physical object. And it really goes to that depth of research and the time and the care and the attention to detail that we put into them.
Yeah. So looking back on American Girl's 40 years, most of the original children who played with the dolls are now adults, and some of them are passing them along to their own children. What role do dolls play in generational storytelling? And specifically, what role does American Girl play in fostering the lifelong love of learning, play, and curiosity? I mean, I know that I got some of my mom's dolls when I was little, and I absolutely loved that because it did feel like I was connected to her, and also it felt like a little history lesson in itself. And I'm surprised at how well American Girl dolls hold up.
One of the sweetest things that happens when I make speeches or go to a library, or my friend Blake here has pop-up exhibits, very often there'll be a grandmother, a mother, and a little girl. And the little girl's carrying the doll. And the grandmother says, I gave that doll to my daughter. And the mother says, now I've handed it. And the little girl's she's holding that doll. She loved that doll, is imbued with love. That doll is imbued with value because the grandmother gave it to the mother. The doll's had a life that the mother gave it, that it's not just a piece of plastic. It's something she's been entrusted with something that she knows has value and a heartfelt value, actually, even to her mother. And she's part of that continuum now. It's just a lovely thing to see. For me, it's also very lovely in that I sort of feel like I'm a member of the family. You know, it's kind of like they feel like they know me very well. You know, if they've read the stories, they feel like they know me too. And so it's a wonderful feeling for a writer. When you send a story out into the world, you feel as though you're starting a communication. And it's lovely if you get a letter back from a reader, that's nice. But then to meet a family who's kept the doll and then passed it on down to the next generation is just ineffable, really, and such a. I didn't foresee this, and it's just a tremendous gift. I'm so grateful to all of you who kept your dolls and kept them carefully and are going to share them with a friend or a niece or a daughter, or just pass it along so someone else can enjoy it too.
Emilie, do you have anything to say about this from research perspective?
Is not what I've been researching, but I will say one of the things I think, it's a little bit of a sidetrack, I think that's interesting is not so much the passing down of the dolls as they are, but looking at the secondary market of the buy, sell, and trade dolls and the reconstruction that people are doing on the dolls, which is really interesting. So, you know, American Girls had a very limited number of boy dolls. Logan, most notably, did not do very well. Bad timing that Logan was released right after the election. Who he became to represent all men. But the secondary market, people have created boy dolls and queer dolls and just really playful creations that they make for themselves and for their families. And I think that that's a really special thing to see also, this the generational shift in, you know, kind of building on that idea of creativity, but in how the dolls are created.
Yeah, they inspire so much further creativity. They really do. I mean, I always was very pleased to hear that if a doll perhaps, you know, lost hair or something like that, you could take her to the store and get her fixed up, the hospital, yes, and get her fixed up very nicely, because that very much worried me. You know, oh no, what if something happens to her? And how they're going to treat her well there. So if you were creating a new historical doll for today, and maybe you are, what story or fashion era would you most want to explore?
That to me.
Yes. Well, it is to you,
Okay.
but you know, it is also.
I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. So I am not going to specifically answer that question, because if I say anything, I run the risk of people kind of thinking something might be in development that might not be. But I will say that I am extremely excited about the adult novel that we're releasing this fall. And I think it's a really interesting and new direction that the brand is taking. And it speaks to this idea of intergenerational kind of storytelling. And so I think when we think about Pleasant's vision, we often talk about like the product in the book, but another core piece of her vision was bringing generations together. So bringing the mothers and the daughters and the grandmothers all together, reading and playing together. And so for this year, for the 40th anniversary, we've really been leaning into that. So of course we have Raquel, who's Samantha's great-great-granddaughter, and we have this like adult novel, and we have this Making of American Girl book. And so we're really kind of reaching our modern women audiences and our modern girl audiences, and we're really trying to kind of go forward with that. And I think that's a really exciting new direction for the brand. So I don't know about a historical character, but That's what I'd say.
Valerie, are there any areas that you would have liked to explore?
That's another great joy of my job is that you can you choose any century, any 20-year period.
Mike?
Sorry. I was just pretending that I was in the 18th century and they didn't have microphones. However, what I was saying was, I have a million ideas. It just there are all kinds of times and places and situations that I would love to write about. I'm always hoping somebody will, ask me to write, maybe send one of my characters to Paris, and then I'd have to go to Paris and do extensive research, So, yeah, there's no limit to it. Just the way the readers themselves also have shown me and written wonderful ideas that they have as well. Another wonderful thing that's happened with the secondary market is there are organizations like Yes, She Can, where dolls are donated, used American Girl dolls are donated, and young women who have autism repair them and then learn to be salespeople in the store and sell them so that then they are prepared to go out into the world. And there's also an organization called Joy, where dolls are donated, fixed up again, and shipped. Some have been shipped to Ukraine, and they're also given to girls who've been through a trauma. Their house is burned down, or they've had a terrible thing happen in their family. So the dolls live on in lives that even outside the original family that they were in, and in a way that we didn't imagine either. Those chubby little shoulders carry a lot.
It's funny. I think also how much playing with dolls when I was young inspired me as a writer later on. In fact, I think one of the reasons that I love playwriting and I love writing dialogue is it often feels like playing with dolls. It feels like I have these characters, these characters are established, and I am just making them talk the same way I would make my Barbies talk, the same way I would make my American Girl dolls talk, the same way I would make my Slovenian families talk. And it's funny how I've actually found there are, I'm not a huge gamer, but there are some video games that I very much like, and a lot of the ones that I do like most recently Tomodachi Living or The Sims or Stardew Valley, people have said those games are essentially just playing with dolls. And you're playing, if you're pretending that you're on a farm, you are kind of doing there's a little bit of like a Felicity, Kirsten thing going on there. And, but then I think, okay, but what's wrong with that? And this is something that I continue on with in my life. So for the last question, I wanted to ask, why do you think dolls continue to matter, not just as toys, but as storytellers and cultural objects, both to children and adults?
Again, I think I'll sort of end where I started, that dolls are a tool of socialization, right? Dolls are what adults, one way in which adults teach girls what's expected of them, what they want them to value, what they want them to care about. Ruth Handler definitely knew that, right? And Ruth Handler, when she was creating Barbie, talked about wanting her daughter to appreciate growing up and the changes in her body. Pleasant talked about that. She wanted girls to value girlhood, right? She didn't want them to be sexualized too young. She didn't want them to be a teen queen or a mommy. I think those were her words. She wanted to give girls chocolate cake with vitamins, right? And she said she was in the business of little girls, right? She knew she wasn't just in the business of making dolls. She was in the business of little girls and the fact that she was selling to them, but also that she was constructing them, right? She was telling them what was important, and dolls are always going to serve that purpose of telling girls, communicating to them what's important.
Don't underestimate how much was communicated back. Because I always say when I speak, people ask me where do the ideas for the stories come from. I've written so many stories. I always say, you. All my best inspiration has come from letters I've received or, suggestions. One girl wrote and said, I just broke my arm. I want Felicity to break her arm. So absolutely, Felicity broke her arm. So it was in the 18th century. They put leeches on your arm. It was disgustingly wonderful. So so many of my ideas have come from specific suggestions from girls or things that I've observed, overhearing my daughter and her friends speaking in the car while I'm driving them to soccer. So the American Girl wasn't only telling girls what was important. They were listening very carefully to what girls thought, and they were reacting very, very quickly and thoroughly and quite excellently, actually, to what girls were telling them was important, too. Again, it's a circle of communication.
And I often think about, kind of going back to the intergenerational ideas, playing dolls is so formative for so many people, and it's kind of an experience that we all kind of have at one point, whether it's a doll that is bought at the store or a doll that you make. And so I think back, like my mom used to get on the ground and like she'd play dolls with me, right? And I'm doing that now with my nieces. And they're not quite old enough for historical characters yet, but we still have these like imaginative play moments with, and you just get on the ground and you play. And I think there's something that just draws all of us to that. And that's not any sort of scholarly insight, but there's something about kind of doll play and getting on the ground and being imaginative. And I feel like as an adult, sometimes we just need an invitation to do it. And I think that's part of the reason why American Girls have lasted so long, and just dolls in general.
And imagination is not to be undervalued either. In your play with the doll, you're vicariously experiencing things, and imagination is a branch of hope. Imagination enables you to imagine a different future for yourself. So no matter how old you are, that's a healthy, very enjoyable thing to do, to think, well, this is the way it is right now, but I can imagine and I can hope and I can then make that happen. So I think that's why doll play is crucial when you're a child, and then the muscle that you grow learning to imagine when you're playing with a doll is a very important muscle to keep flexing your whole life long.
I was going to say, you were quite academic, because what's happening there is right. It's girls are trying on identities, right? They're trying different experiences out. We were talking backstage about one of the staff people here was talking about how her dolls kind of got into it with each other and they were mean to each other. And she was not that way in real life. So she was experimenting and trying on different personas and seeing what that feels like. And that's part of that joyful play, is that you get to be mean and you get to try out different things.
And can I just speak up also for the fact that there's no magic? I was always very, very, very firm, no magic. I always thought with Harry Potter, if you have a wand, then where's the story? And that's what I liked about them. They're real, and they have real limitations, and they face real problems, and they have to come up with girl-sized solutions to those problems as well.
You have to figure out how to resolve things, and you have these memories of relationships, like what you were talking about earlier, Valerie. It's not just the relationships of the person you're playing with, but the relationship that you make with the doll and the different personas that she takes on.
Yeah, and the stakes were real. The stakes in these books were very, very real. There were, people were escaping being enslaved. People were losing family members. People were losing their best friends, to war, to disease. There were real stakes in these stories, and I think that's why we liked them so much, and why even years later, when my sister started reading them, I was, stealing her copies of, Meet Addie and the Addie books, because I was like, okay, these are still really good. I'm still really interested in these. I think that they are something that does, and I think there is something that about, literature and toys that does not speak down to children and that meets them where they're at. That is very, very important. And I know from my own personal experience, and I know from, the people and the works that I still love to this day, be it Mr. Rogers or Judy Blume or Beverly Cleary or, LeVar Burton, who I met a couple years ago and, very much was very emotional to meet because Reading Rainbow was everything. I know that if you can touch a child's life, if you can affect a child's life in a positive way, especially, young girls, if you're young, if you're feminine, you are often told that the things that you like are silly. They're not important. And what you come to learn from that is that you are silly, you are unimportant, you don't matter, you can't make a difference. So I think that there is something so beautiful about, hearing the opposite, about getting the opposite message. It's something that is very encouraging. And is that something that you've seen? Obviously, you've seen happen, right? You've gotten these responses, and
yes, and in terms of the aspirations and the jobs that people have done as well. I mean, I have to say that I don't want to come over as noble, because it made me mad in books when girls weren't the main character, when they were just reacting, when they were the sidekick. That made me mad. I didn't feel like that was true for me. I had an opinion on everything. And it was very important to me that my characters were always, there weren't just interesting events happening on either side of them. They weren't just somebody's sister or brother or daughter or something. They were for better or worse, they were the truly main character. And I think that, even if it wasn't spoken, comes through in every single story and says to the reader, whoa, I'm the main character in my story too. I'm the heroine of my story too. I have the responsibility, both the freedom and the joy of being my own heroine, but I also have the responsibility of figuring out who I am and what I want to do with who I am.
That is absolutely beautiful, and I think that we are going to leave it at that, because I don't really know how we can top that. But I wanted to say thank you so much to Valerie. Thank you so much, Valerie, Emilie, and Kat. You have been wonderful, and this has brought back so many wonderful memories. I know definitely for me, and I can imagine for the audience as well. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much to the Library of Congress for, once again, treating girls and girl things and taking them very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.